All right, today we've got a Polaris Trail Boss 250 motor here. This is a two-stroke motor, and I'm going to be digging into it to figure out what's going on with it, figure out if we've got a piston problem, cylinder walls, maybe a crankshaft problem, maybe a bearing in the lower end is bad. We're also going to look at the charging system. We've got the recoil pull starter off here. This is a 1987 model. Most of these Polaris Trail Boss 250s are going to be identical, so I can point out some differences, but for the most part, tearing them down is going to be exactly the same. We're going to start by pulling off the cylinder head here. We've got 12mm bolts, 2, 4, 6 of those on the top here. All right, then as soon as we get the bolts off or the nuts off of here, you can just go ahead and lift up on there. Underneath there, you'll see your head gasket there, and sometimes that'll stick to either side there. You want to make sure going back together that you clean it up really well so there's no gasket or debris on there. The dome looks good. That's another thing you want to inspect. You can see there the bottom of the spark plug. So cylinder head looks good. We're going to go ahead and keep these bolts with the cylinder and the head here. Next, we're going to pull the cylinder off. Before we do that, I'm going to pull this motor mount here, and this is a rubber damper here that attaches the motor to the frame there. We've got the actual damper part of it pulled off, then we've got our bolts underneath here. These are going to be a 13mm. And then we've got our ground wire that attaches to the top mount there. We've got our intake boot here. That's going to be a Allen screw, 2 Allen screws. These boots have a common problem with drying up and getting holes in them or tearing, so you need to inspect it really good. All right, boot is off there. We've got our exhaust manifold on this side. What I'm going to do now is pull these cylinder bolts here off the bottom, or the nuts. They're a 14mm. And then while we have the motor flipped on this side, I'm going to go ahead and remove this exhaust manifold here. Alright, exhaust manifold is off there. I'm going to flip it over and pull those other cylinder bolts. Alright, cylinder bolts are off there. Now we are going to pull this cylinder. And sometimes you can just take your hand and tap up on it. You want to be careful tapping anywhere where there might be, you might damage a fin with even a rubber mallet. So if you can find a good spot, a lot of times it's simply just breaking the seal of that lower base gasket. Then you can take your hand and just kind of pull it up there. And you might have to walk it back and forth a little bit, but go ahead and pull it off. You may even have to spin it. There's your cylinder. Check the walls for any kind of scoring. That piston has some scoring up and down on it. Not major, and you really can't even feel anything, but we're going to do a little deeper digging to see if those grooves are deeper than I think, and we'll measure it to see if it's out of round, to see if we need to replace cylinder or piston and rings or what all we need to replace there. So set the cylinder aside. To get the piston off, I like to use a pick here, and then what I do is come in that groove on the side of the piston to get the circlip off of here, and go ahead and pry that clip out, and you can take and just push that out. If it doesn't come out right away, you can take and tap on it. You do want to make sure that you don't aren't running into that crankshaft. You want to make sure you don't scratch that crankshaft up going through there. If you're going to replace the piston anyways. A lot of times you'll come with a new pin. You can grab a pair of side dikes, just kind of turn it and pull it out at the same time. There's your piston there. We'll throw our pin back in there just to keep it all together. And then we've got our clip here that I'll put in too. What I like to do with these clips then, take the open side, push it up against it, clear into the back of that groove there. And then grab our pick here. We've got our bearing here. That'll be replaced with the piston. Our oil pump is here, and we've got 2 Phillips screws. I don't know if you'll be able to see it there. There we go. We've got 2 Phillips screws holding this oil pump on there. All right, we'll take those screws out there, and then you can just lift up on that oil pump there. Keep those screws together. Your gear, your worm gear is down inside there. We can pull it out now or later. Might just save that for later. We've got our bottom engine mount here. Takes a 14 millimeter. You will have to remove these bottom mounts to split that case. If you're not splitting the case, don't worry about removing those. We do have another ground wire here. It's a 12 millimeter. Pull that. That's a case bolt that runs all the way through that crankcase there. We've got our recoil pull starter that sits on here. It's obviously not on there right now. We've got our cup here. I'm gonna go ahead and pull that cup. Just a 15 millimeter gear, excuse me, a 14 millimeter gear. Okay, this is a 14 millimeter bolt that we have to pull this cup off of here. And we've got this case here. We'll remove these 10 millimeter bolts. Alright, cover is off there. Not a lot to that cover. Starter will sit here. Evidently somebody has pulled that starter already. It goes into this bushing here is a Bendix, a starter drive gear that goes into this bushing here. So you want to inspect that bushing, make sure it's in good condition. Alright, we're going to go ahead and pull this flywheel here. I've got our bolt that we pulled out of here for the recoil, the cup, and I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with that. We do have on this model a spacer here. You can get in behind there with a screwdriver, just kind of pry up. It does have an O-ring in the middle there that seals things up. You want to inspect that, make sure it's good. All right, we've got our puller here. I'm going to run these 8 millimeter bolts into your flywheel. Make sure you don't put them in there too far and damage that stator. You want to make sure they go in probably about a half an inch, maybe not quite that far. You do want to make sure they're threaded enough. Because if they're not, they will just pull the threads right out of the area where these bolts are being installed. Then you want to make sure your flywheel is pulling straight up and down. And then go ahead and just impact this in. The vibration and this bolt here pushing on the crank will actually lift it up out of there. So there's your flywheel there. Inspect it. Inspect this gear here around the outside to make sure that's in good condition. We can go ahead and remove our flywheel puller there. That'll be the last time we need that. And then we'll go ahead and remove this stator. We've got a couple Phillips screws to remove this stator plate. Different ways you can do this. We've got different parts of your stator, your charging system here. If you're going to replace the entire thing, all you need to do is pull that Phillips screw and that Phillips screw, push your outlet or push your electrical line out of your case here, and I'll show you how to do that. But that's the easiest way of removing it. If you're just wanting to replace a piece or two of this stator, you can remove just that certain piece if you'd like. Still think that you need to remove this plate just to make sure that you get all the wires secured how you want them before going back together. So the wires kind of run on the back side there, and if you have this plate pulled, it's going to allow you to see where those wires are running and how that's fitting together. So then I just take a larger screwdriver then, Phillips, flat, whatever. You don't want to damage this grommet that's on the side here, but I just kind of take and push that out. If you've got a large screwdriver there, you're not going to poke a hole in this rubber here, but you do want to make sure that you don't damage that at all, because going back together, you want to make sure that that seals properly so you don't get water and debris in there. Once you get that grommet kind of pushed out somewhat, you can take and feed that line through there, and then one at a time you can get the electrical connectors through that little hole there. And then there's your stator there. We'll test it. We'll show you a couple different tests on how to how to test this stator, make sure it's working. I'm going to flip this case back over again. I'm going to go ahead and remove this engine mount here. All right, you can see there our oil pump gear there fell out when we were removing this motor mount. We've got a handful of bolts over here that will allow us to split this case. Looks like 5 bolts there. We'll take a rubber mallet. All right, then you can just take and tap on the crank. It's a lot of times the best, but you want to make sure you're using a plastic mallet or a rubber mallet so you're not damaging up that crankshaft. All right, we've got this crank off of there, out of this side of the case. Clean that up really good. We've got your engine number, which would be on your stator side of that crank case. And then we can go ahead using that rubber mallet again to tap this side of the crank out of the crankcase. That is the crankcase split on a Polaris Trail Boss 250. Let me know if you have questions or comments. Make sure and leave those below. If this video has been helpful, please subscribe and share and like. Thanks for watching.